Welcome to Gameplan, a podcast where we're going to be meeting athletes, business owners, entrepreneurs, and industry leaders. I'm Kaio Philipe, and I'm going to be your host. What is your game plan?
Some people have said I started reality TV because we told the stories of these 8 fighters in a tournament, and then you watch them. Did Joe Rogan create the UFC, or did the UFC create Joe Rogan? So I think men go into sports kind of for similar reasons. They want to be famous, they want to impress women, they want to get rich, right? It's one of those 3 things, or all 3. I think Conor McGregor is the closest replacement to Muhammad Ali that we've had.
On this week's episode, Campbell McLaren.
From combat clubs to creating the UFC, I'm here with the brilliant Campbell McLaren. Campbell, how are you?
I'm very well. Apparently I'm brilliant too. So that's, I don't know if that was the first time I've been called that, but it still sounds a little funny.
No, you are an amazing guy. You are Scottish, right? You're telling me your name, Campbell, is very common.
It's the largest clan in Scotland. But when I moved to this country when I was 7, I was called Campbell Soup, chicken and vegetable.
Sure.
It didn't work so well here in the U.S.
How did a boy move from Scotland to America, to New York, ended up going to the media business, to combat clubs, and then ends up creating the largest fight tournament on earth, right? Which is the UFC, and then eventually Combate. We're going to talk about that. But what happened?
I mean, it is kind of a long story. You know, my dad was a fighter pilot for the Royal Air Force, and he got hurt flying. And he was so angry he couldn't fly anymore. He told my mom, "We're moving to Australia, or we're moving to the States." Mm-hmm. And she had a sister here. So, like most immigrants, we went where the one family member was.
Right.
But you know how I got through the comedy business into the fight business. I mean, it sounds crazy, right? I did manage Joy Behar, who's on The View, and for a period of time that was very uncomfortable. I managed Larry David, who's a very funny guy, and created Curb, among other things. And what I found in the comedy business is you have to have a good point of view. You have to be able to an extent, tell your own story. Right? So the things I learned from managing comedians and producing a lot of comedy TV shows were about establishing that character, right? We've seen in the news lately, Stephen Colbert's show's been canceled, and people are saying it's the end of late night TV. When I was doing comedy, you honed your 6-minute comedy routine, because you did that on Johnny Carson, or you did it on David Letterman, Jay Leno, and it was 6 minutes. And what I learned from comedy is you've got to have the story to tell in an entertaining way that starts immediately and brings people into it. And strange as it sounds, the connection between stand-up and fighting is really there.
So you're saying that UFC is kind of a comedy show?
I'm saying, no, I didn't say that. It's a reality show, and they're very funny moments. When I hired Joe Rogan to be in the UFC, I brought him in because as a comedian, he could handle hecklers and changes in, what was going on in the live environment. And when we were doing the UFC, we could throw to Joe and he could make up time, he could stall, He could explain things. So that comedy skill, to an extent of improvisation, was very useful for Joe Rogan in the beginnings with the UFC. But what I noticed was the comedians use very violent language. I killed, I destroyed, or if it didn't go well, they bombed. So there was this sense of the sort of one-on-one that fighters also have to have.
Right.
I think it's a very strange skill to stand in front of a room of strangers and just tell them about your life, right? So it takes a certain amount of courage. And the same with fighters, you're not on a team. It's just you. It's all on you. And I think there's a strange sort of ego between comedians and fighters as well.
You're by yourself in a stage, and you have to win, right?
You have to win.
You have to win people's applause, and you have to win, or not die, but get hit.
Comedians all think they're absolutely the worst,
Right.
Larry David, and fighters all think they're the best.
You're right. So let's go back for a second. So you moved here in the U.S. You've been living in New York since the 80s, right? It's been a while, and then you started in comedy, and then you were like, all right, I'm gonna in New York City, such a rough city. We are here in New York City today. We're in Times Square, right, in this beautiful studio, and you decided that people would like to watch two guys in a cage fighting, and people would pay for it. I mean, they were paying for Tyson, right, with boxing. That was happening.
Boxing and pay-per-view go back many, many years, the 70s.
But not jiu-jitsu, not like freestyle.
But first off, you said something you got to back up a moment, too, because you said in a cage. When we started the UFC, we didn't know where to put it.
In an octagon. Let's go to the octagon.
Oh, the octagon. So then you're even backing up a little further. So let me tell you that I produced a series of pay-per-view shows that were meant to lead into the UFC.
Right.
So I did a comedian named Andrew Dice Clay that was very controversial. So the controversy helped sell the pay-per-view buys, right? Then I did a show with the Iron Maiden that was very bloody and very over the top. And a lot of that was also marketing that I used for the UFC.
What do you mean bloody and over the top?
So we did a live show for the BBC and pay-per-view. Iron Maiden, their famous singer, Bruce Dickinson, it was his last concert. And I found a team of movie makers that made the Hellraiser movies. And we decided to kill the band one by one live during the show. And so we chopped off their heads, cut off their hands, and we used movie special effects.
Right.
And we got in a little bit of a trouble because
I'm sure.
one of the women, we had this pretty young woman who was wearing a bikini, and we put her in this device. Bruce Dickinson puts her in the device and then saws through her. And there was a wax body between, it was two women, right? It was the head and the legs, and in between there was a wax body. And, special effects, right? But live. So when we cut through her, the chainsaw made the wax look like intestines. So it really looked like we had killed somebody. So we got a lot of trouble because the BBC...
Backlash.
And BBC is the government-owned TV network. They were really... And we didn't show them this particular trick because we weren't sure we could recreate it. Anyway, and so from the controversial comedian and from the very outrageous horror heavy metal show, we shot that at Pinewood Studios in England, one of the most famous studios in the world. And so I learned that if you do controversial stuff and it's got enough blood, and people will pay for that.
Do you think still the case today? Like to these days, do you think with the new generation, the new media distribution, social media, do you think young people are willing to pay that for that type of content? Is the same?
Let me leave the blood
consumption.
Here's how I think of MMA. It's an angry sport for an angry time, right? Step away from the blood, because as a proud Brazilian, you know the tradition of jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, of course.
Which the Gracie family always thinks is the most elegant way to win a fight, right? There's no blood. It's an arm bar, it's a leg lock, it's a choke. So it's not so much about blood. It is about feeling you're watching something that's very real. And that's why the UFC took off. And to an extent, it's a little bit why Combate Global has become successful, because people see it's very genuine, and we don't cherry pick fights, and we don't protect fighters.
Right.
Everyone earns their way at Combate. But when I started the UFC, WWE was popular. There was a bunch of hair bands, like it was the overblown 70s, 80s. And what I did, and some people have said I started reality TV because we told the stories of these 8 fighters in a tournament, and then you watch them. So it wasn't necessarily the blood. It was feeling it was real, that this was not scripted.
The reality TV.
The reality TV.
Yeah, so you're right. And why New York and not LA or Vegas, or like places where fighting was, or media was more intense?
Well, look, I do Combate in Miami because Miami is the capital of South America. Right. That's why we do in Miami. We only did one show in New York back in the UFC days. We did Denver, we did Charlotte, North Carolina. We traveled it around. With Combate, it's a very different thing because it's really a TV property. So we do it in a TV studio. So New York used to be the mecca of fighting. The big boxing matches were always held here. Now I really think it's between Las Vegas and Miami.
Yeah.
Miami's got a real fight scene.
And it's a bigger business as well, right? You have the UFC was sold for a few $1 billion, right? You founded that, you co-founded that business, and you left, I think was around the 2000s, early 2000s, right? When
You've done your research, amigo.
Yeah. And how do you feel about seeing, is your child, you know, in a way, it was your child, let's just put it that way. It's not your child anymore, but it was your child. How do you feel when you see that so much is a cultural movement, is part of the pop culture?
It's part of pop culture.
And of course you did very well creating Combate, which is for the Hispanics and Latinos, and is doing tremendously well.
Well, it's been Hispanics until this November. Then it will be for Latinos because we're going to Brazil.
You're right. That's actually a good distinction because Latinos incorporate Brazilians. Yeah.
Is there a crossover in the culture between Brazil and the Spanish-speaking countries in South America? Of course.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But the important part of Combate is when I started it, I went to see Dana White, who runs the UFC, and Lorenzo Fertitta, who was then the owner. And I told them what I wanted to do because I didn't want them as enemies. And because, as you say, I do love the UFC. I do think of it as one of my kids. But I saw that the South American tradition, the Mexican tradition of boxing, is one of fighting with great heart. Corazon, right? Real spirit. Brazil was well represented in the UFC, still is, started with the Gracies, still represented, but there were very few Mexicans, Colombians, Cubanos, Dominicanos. It wasn't well represented. The Spanish-speaking countries weren't well represented, so I thought that was a good thing to fill, right? They say find a need and fill it. And so you have countries that have these great fighting tradition, primarily boxeo, right? But didn't have an outlet. When I went to see the new training center in Las Vegas, this is, I don't know, 6-7 years ago, and I was getting the tour from the guys, because I'm very friendly with the folks over there. Hunter Campbell actually is Dana White's right-hand guy, and it turns out Hunter Campbell and I are actually related. Our grandfathers knew each other in Scotland. Anyway, so they take
another Campbell.
Another Campbell. Yes.
There you go.
And so they take me and they go, look, there are 5 Scottish fighters in the UFC right now. And I looked, and they have this big board with who's from where. And I go, how many Mexican fighters? And they said 5. I said, so Scotland has 5 million people, and you have 5 fighters. And Mexico has 160 million people, and you have 5 fighters. I go, you're not looking hard enough.
And that's the cultural movement, right? You have the UFC probably going to Latin America later. It became part of the pop culture through pay-per-view. Obviously, it's how young generations, they got familiar now with TikTok, and it's a huge corporation. Do you think for Combate you need a Joe Rogan?
It's an interesting question. I think,
because it became part of the, it's one person like a host can change the game.
Did Joe Rogan create the UFC, or did the UFC create Joe Rogan? Right, and because I think that's how you break that question down. What I have at Combate is a guy named Joey Mendez, who's fighting in September, and CBS Sports said he is the Mexican Jake Paul. So what he is, I think it might be more valuable to us than Joe. And Joe's great at what he does, and I consider him a friend, and so this isn't a knock on Joe. But he never was a professional fighter. Where Joey was on the Acapulco Shore, he's been on Casa de Famosa, he's a reality star, he's a good-looking guy. Like Jake Paul, he's built, and he really fights. So he's having his 3rd fight for us in September. He's good-looking, ladies love him, he can fight, he can talk. That's who I need, right?
And it's interesting, you said ladies, the audience, the demographics for Combate, you have over 51% women.
I love your research team. They've done a really good job.
I'm
or
a
if you
fan.
did.
I am a fan.
So yeah, it's some of our shows are 51% female
how is that
viewers.
possible, right?
Well,
Yeah, but I want to break that because I think that's really important. Sometimes people have this perception that fighting is just something violent and it's like, but it's a sport, right? At the end of the day, it's a sport.
Absolutely.
And women love sport, like So it's really interesting data that women are the bigger audience, the largest audience for Combate.
Not every show, but a lot of shows.
Right.
I think that.
Why do you think is that? Like,
Well, there's two theories. There's the more sociological based one, and then there's what my daughter thinks. I'll tell you what my daughter thinks last.
How old is she?
She works for Combate. She runs our digital side.
How old
She's
is she?
34.
She's 34. Okay,
Yeah.
great. She's a millennial. She's a millennial.
She's a millennial, right? Exactly. So I think men go into sports kind of for similar reasons. They want to be famous. They want to impress women. They want to get rich, right? It's one of those three things, or all three. Who's more famous than the top fighter? Soccer. Look, we say sometimes we want to be the number 2 sport.
Okay, so you
for
first
Latins,
first
right?
soccer, second.
And everybody else says football. So first football and then Combate.
I mean soccer.
I mean soccer. That was the original name. It was Associated Football.
Right.
But a lot of people, because the English put the rules in first, and then a lot of people didn't like the sound of, and so they called it soccer. Then Americans started calling it soccer. Then everybody else didn't like what the Americans called it, so it went back to football. But
who is the number 1 fighter right now globally in your opinion?
I think that Jowie is the one that's most popular for us because he brings in a pop culture following, and he can talk, and he can back it up.
Right.
So I think it's he. And then on the women's side, we have a fighter named La Loba, Lucera Acosta, and she talks. She's really represents women in the sport very well. Right. She had a husband that was a policeman in Mexico, and he was abusing her. And she learned jiu-jitsu just to protect herself. And one night, and the police wouldn't do anything because he was a policeman. So one night he's giving her a good going over, and she's had enough, and she chokes him unconscious, grabs her daughter, and comes to the U.S. And now she has a green card. And so when she fights, there's a lot she's fighting for. She isn't fighting to be rich, but she wants to get paid. She isn't fighting to be famous, but she is famous. And, whether she wants to find a man or whatever, I don't think she cares. I think women fight for their own reasons.
I was talking to Grant Hill the other day, and his daughter, I think she's 19 or 20 years old, and she's in the fighting sport. She didn't follow basketball. She followed the fighting. You think in Latin America, as you build Combate right now is in multiple countries, Spanish countries, right? So you're going to Brazil next. And do you think Latin America, they have a different fan base? Is different than America in that sense? Or what is your average character or average consumer for your product in Latin?
What a good question. I think you almost have to go country by country.
Right.
Because
and that's a good point, because Latin America is not like
it's not one
Spanish,
country.
Everybody speaks Spanish. It's like Europe in that sense, right? Every country has its own.
And I think there's also the U.S. Hispanic population, which there's English dominant, there's Spanish dominant, there's bilingual, fully bilingual. So you almost have to go country by country. The U.S. has had MMA for 31 years now, so pretty established here. Mexico, it's still fairly new, maybe 10, 12 years old, but they're coming on fast. Great athletes. Again, they have a tremendous Taekwondo Olympic team, and boxing has been part of that culture forever.
Does Taekwondo, respectfully, does Taekwondo sell tickets? Not really, right? Like, it's not like something that people...
No. Nothing does, except for MMA and boxing.
Right. You are in the media business and you want to sell...
But MMA means mixed martial arts.
Yeah.
All right. So when the Gracies won, in 1993, it's because jiu-jitsu could beat everything. And the arts weren't mixed. That was martial art versus martial art. That's how we started. As they come together, you have to be good at jiu-jitsu, you have to be good at boxing, you have to be good at taekwondo, you have to be good at Muay Thai. You have to have all these things. But I think that, you need a tradition of fighting for to build an audience, right? Mexico has it, Chile has it,
Right.
Colombia has it.
Fight. What is the Colombian one? You know?
In Colombia, it's more with they have some boxing, but I was at RCN, which is the Colombian TV network.
RCN,
Yeah, 2 years ago. And I'm in a room, and it's all sports executives. And I go, I know what the number one sport is, right? It's like, I don't even think football's a sport in South America. I think it's a religion, right?
I would agree with that.
It's beyond sport. So I said, I know what's the number one sport. What is the number two sport? And they have this big argument. The executives at the TV network, it's a sports network. They go, it's bicycling because there's a Colombian in the Tour de France this year. It's volleyball, it's surfing.
It's not a common sense.
There is no second sport. And I think Colombia's young people really taken to MMA because there have been a couple really good Colombian fighters. When we have our Colombian fighters in Combate, I think as a national percentage, we get a bigger response from Colombia than we do from Mexico. And Chile is very similar. Chile is a small country, but they've had MMA for a while. We have a husband and wife team from Colombia.
Wow.
They got married, they met in Combate and got married. So it's a very vibrant scene in some countries.
How much money a fighter can make? Like when you think about of course you have the Messis or the Ronaldos, of the world that made millions. Jake Paul, it's he does MMA, does for pay-per-views, right?
Well, he does boxing.
Boxing.
And
right.
I think.
But a fighter in general, what is the money that one can make?
It's hard to say in general because that's like saying how much can a soccer player make.
Right.
If there's a players' union, there's a minimum, but typically there isn't a maximum.
Is there a union for fighters?
No. And I don't know that's like a union for cats. I think that fighters are so independent of mind that I think it'd be hard to unionize them.
And also the lifespan, right? You think about fighters, like what is the lifespan of a fighter? How many years they can work?
Well, Mike Tyson just fought, didn't he?
Right.
And Mike's kind of my age.
Yeah, he trained a lot, but he wasn't fighting.
It was an exhibition.
It was an exhibition. He was paid a lot of money to do that. But how much time do you think they have to work to?
I think they're fighters in the UFC active into their late 30s and early 40s. Right? We focus on 22-year-old fighters. So
wow.
We go for young fighters. We sign them before the UFC gets them. I think that's a big part of our success. We have very young fighters who put on a heck of a show. But I'll tell you how, I'll be very specific. I'll answer your question specifically, and most fight promoters won't. In Combate, we do Combate, the Copa Combate. First prize, one night, is $100,000. Okay. I think typically our pay scale is like the entry-level pay scale in the UFC. So a fighter can go home. The Mexico City events, a fighter will go home with between $8,000 and $20,000 for the night. So the Copa is you win $100,000 in one night. Right. Some organizations pay more, but they typically have more veteran fighters. We have very new fighters. So if you give a young man from Chile or a young woman the ability to win $15,000, which is about half a year's salary in Chile, and their abuela is watching, right? And they come in with their flag, and so they can win a lot of money, their family's watching, and they represent their country. They fight like their hair's on fire, And that's a big part of why Combate's become such a big success. Our TV ratings in the U.S. are better than MLS. We beat MLB. We beat a lot of NASCAR. We've beaten UFC a number of times.
Let's talk about that. So your business is Combate now is a media company that organizes the fights around in Miami mainly, right?
Mainly
but
in Miami.
For the Hispanic and soon Latino audience, because you're going to Brazil in the end of the year. How do you make money?
We make money the way any sports does, with the exception of selling tickets. So we primarily take our revenue from media rights deals, which this year we're transitioning out, and we're going to a full direct-to-consumer offering. So we've done a global partnership with YouTube. They put us on what they call YouTube Select, which is a special tier, a little more favorable revenue share with them. They support us through promotional tie-ins, putting us on the homepage, a lot of things that they can do.
They will push the content.
They will push the content.
And it's an exclusivity contract. You can...
Here's the funny thing about YouTube. They don't ask for exclusivity. Because they're taking over the world.
Right.
They don't care if you're on someplace else.
You're right.
But other places care if you're on YouTube.
Yeah.
And I think what is particularly important for us in YouTube's push to be on TV, rather than a phone or a laptop or a tablet. In Mexico, and certainly Brazil, and certainly all of South America, few people have an unlimited phone plan. People pay by the minute.
Right.
So you'll watch a little, but you've really got to make a commitment to use your minutes. YouTube is now, 51% of the US viewership of YouTube is on television. So as we spread through South America and our success in Mexico, we are tied into YouTube's plan to be watched on TV. And it's free. Free is good.
Right, of course. And you get money through advertising and revenue share.
We get advertising, we get sponsorship, and we get the programmatic advertising through YouTube. And then we're also on, I don't want to forget Samsung TV, our new partnership with Samsung TV.
Oh, it's interesting because majority of the people, the companies, they first would look into the US market, then they would go to Latin America, right, as a second, third tier territory. Instead, you are focusing, you're doubling down in Latin America or in Latinos in general. Why do you think that will pay off or pays off for you?
Well, I think it's a numbers game. I think first off, we look at, the company was originally called Combate Americas.
All right.
And Brazil, they love that name, right? Because there's a lot of Americas, right? In this country, many non-Hispanic, non-Latin people think there's only one America. That S confused everyone, right? Mm-hmm. So I tend to think of the Americas as our market. So I started with North America, which is US Hispanic, 65 million people. How many people in Canada? There 25 million in Canada? So 65 million people is the population of France or Germany or the UK or Spain. So I started in North America. I have the US Hispanic, 65 million, and roughly there's 130, 140 million people in Mexico. So you put that together, I've got 200 million customers who live next door to each other. Yep. Now, we might be building a fence between the neighbors at this point, but still, there's such a crossover in the audiences. Univision, which owns 10%, Televisa Univision owns 10% of Combate. Liga MX is what they show in the U.S., right? They're not showing MLS. They're not showing the U.S. soccer.
Right.
They show Liga MX, the Mexican soccer. So for me, I saw it first and foremost as North America, U.S., Mexico. Right? That's the first market. And we treat it kind of like one, right? We're doing 2 shows, August and then September, in Mexico City. So August is...
It's a live show with audience, with people.
Yes, yeah. And
so you sell tickets in those?
No, it's an invited audience only in a TV studio.
Okay, got it.
And we're in TV Azteca's TV studio.
Right.
And Elisa Salinas, part of the Salinas family, is one of our investors. So we have a great relationship with.
So your company, you talk about your investors. Your company is in what stage right now? You are like raising, like what is the, if you like thinking about venture capital, what it would be the stage your company is right now?
Well, I think we're sort of between VC and PE at this point. We've raised a fair amount of money.
It's evolved.
It's evolved, and we've launched this product. We know the content works.
Right.
You and I off camera were talking about content is what drives everything.
Let me tell you one thing about that, and on camera. I remember in Brazil, I've been living here for nearly 10 years now, but I remember in Brazil, it would be a moment, like on Saturday evening for people to watch UFC. It was like that would be where people, you mentioned about Colombia, what's the number 2 sport in the country. And I remember in Brazil, maybe at some point, like fighting MMA is probably the second in now, like in pop culture at least, right? That's where people with probably higher income that can pay for the pay-per-view or could pay for the pay-per-view at the time. I don't know if that's how they do anymore, because I'm sure with social media, TikTok and
they're in the midst of changing their deal.
Yeah.
They've left Globo.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you about that as well, because it was something that people would gather together in a house on Saturday evening, and that pay-per-view would be super expensive, like, you know, hundreds of dollars or $100. And but that's changing with the new generation, the Gen Zs and millennials as well. You're consuming media in a different way.
Absolutely.
So on TikTok, on Instagram Reels, how do you prepare your business for that?
I think, you know, you just said a lot. I'll back up a little bit. By the way, Brazil's the only. I can go to any country on earth and say I created MMA, right? I don't do that in Brazil because they had Vale Tudo.
You could say I created MMA, I created UFC, I created Joe Rogan, I created
Yes,
show.
Yeah, and a lot of that I still can say in Brazil, but I won't say I created MMA because Vale Tudo has been on TV for 70 or 80 years, and it's so much part of the Brazilian tradition. Fighting is part of the tradition. But I think that content, it doesn't matter what platform you watch on, right? I think people talk about, you know, TikTok's important because it's short. Young people have an attention span. You've just got to give them something they want to watch.
Right.
Now, I took my youngest to see the McGregor-Mayweather boxing match. And I think Conor did pretty well. I think he did pretty well. Floyd's maybe the greatest dancer, anyway, of all time.
Who's the best fighter on earth for you, an all-time fighter? Who's your Pelé?
Who's your favorite singer? It's hard to say that. I think that I think Conor McGregor is the closest replacement to Muhammad Ali that we've had. Wow. Because Conor's having his own issues, and I hope he gets past it. But first, he represented a really tough neighborhood in Dublin, and Dublin's not Rio, but Dublin does have tough neighborhoods, yep. Right? He represented that neighborhood. Then he represented Dublin. Then he represented Ireland. Then he came and fought in Vegas, and he represented Irish Americans. And then he came to represent everyone. Because a fighter is David versus Goliath. A fighter gets everyone's attention. You root for the underdog. And Conor came in, and, you know, he was this cocky Irishman. But the Irish have had this powerful neighbor for 1,000 years that beat up on them, the English. And then the same thing in Mexico, because Mexico had Spain beating up on them, and now they have the U.S. beating up on them. So when you find a fighter that comes out of one of these underdog countries, like Brazil in soccer is not an underdog.
Right.
Right? Brazil in fighting is not an underdog,
yeah,
right?
But
Mexico is an underdog in both, because the Mexicans never seem to pay out. The teams never have the success that the fans hope they would. And then Mexico is yet to really have a great MMA champion. So a fighter represents, and then once they go beyond their neighborhood, their city, their country, like Muhammad Ali, they start to represent everyone
Yep.
that's been abused. You know, Muhammad Ali spoke to people taking power for themselves, right? Conor McGregor, you know, I was in Dublin watching him fight Bandau, and I'm there with Dana White and Lorenzo Fertitta, right? And there's 11,000 drunk Irishmen in the O2, and they're stomping their feet in unison, and we knew that if Conor lost that fight, it was going to be a bad day.
Yeah.
Because he represented the whole island. And that's what fighters do. They represent a people, a group, and that's why Combate has really caught on. For Mexicans to come in and see a Mexican fighter doing well, wrapped in the Mexican flag,
They will.
It's
They will
over
go
the
for it,
top,
of course.
right?
Campbell, you were talking about fighters. You're a fighter, right? You are, you know, you're fighting.
I am passionate.
You're passionate. What is your game?
Isn't business a fight?
You know, listening to all your stories, your background, you've done a lot for this community, for the sports community, for the fighting community, for the MMA, UFC, and TV, frankly. When you wake up in the morning every day now, what is your game plan? What is next for you?
One, I think that MMA teaches you to go with the flow. Things change, business changes. For instance, when I started Combate, we were doing live events. I've done 28 events in Mexico. We've done Houston, Dallas, Chicago, New York, Miami, LA, and then COVID hit. So that game plan changed. The UFC, Dana White had a Middle Eastern government able to give him an island. I didn't have an island, right? So we had to morph, and that's when we became a studio-based product. It was during COVID, and that's when Univision bought into the company, put us in their TV studio. That's great. Okay, then the big change is in linear TV. You know that's changing. Have they lost 50% of their audience? It looks like it.
Yep.
Right? Are they losing the advertising? Yes. Are they losing the affiliate fees? Absolutely. So, again, Combate's had to shift and now focus on a digital delivery system, a direct-to-consumer delivery system, and that's why we did the deal with YouTube. So I think my game plan is to present the highest quality, exciting content I can every show. Every show is exciting. Norman Lear, who's a TV genius and very respected, no longer with us, he gave me an award called the Imagen Award. It is for producers that put the Hispanic U.S. community in a positive light. Mm-hmm. So he gave me, so personally, I won big black tie, thing in Beverly Hills, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. But I'm proud of that. We do great content every day, great fights every fight. Our fights are, I believe, more exciting than anyone's, right? So we have to do that. That's what we have to do. And then the rest of the game plan is, we got to dance, we got to move, you got to see where, as they say, you got to go where the puck is going. Right? So do I have a game plan? Present great content, celebrate Hispanic culture, soon to celebrate Latin culture, because when we go to Brazil. And, that's what you got to do every day.
Amazing. Well, from the Octagon to the Inter-TV studios, thank you so much, Campbell McLaren. You're the best. Thank you so much for what you've done in the community. I'll see you in Brazil.
Absolutely.
For the big launch for Combate.
Come to Mexico City.
I will, for sure. Mexico is a big market. We are in Argentina now. We are in Brazil, obviously. And it will be a pleasure to see you and to celebrate your fights and to see you changing the game plan as you go. Thank you so much, Kim. Appreciate it a lot.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you. Gameplan is brought to you by Inter. Nearly 40 million clients around the Americas. You want to know more? Download Inter right now. Stay tuned for more.